Henry Cejudo made some real headlines. All he said, I got to tell you, this got back to me more times. My phone was ringing. I had more people texting me this article, calling me, saying, what do you think about this? All Henry said is that if he was doing a GOAT list, he would put himself in front of Khabib. And Henry was then very respectful of Khabib. He said, I believe that Khabib could have been the 170-pound champion. I believe he could have been the 185-pound champion. I believe stylistically and with the people that were there at the time he was competing, he could have beat them all. But he didn't. And he was talking about himself. And he said, listen, I had the belt at 2 different weight classes. So on a greatest of all times list, I would be in front of Khabib. Okay. Simple statement. Is it true? When you're talking about the greatest of all time, is it true? Do you need to cover the spread at multiple weights? Now, in fairness, there is no criteria. It's just an open discussion. It's you can throw anybody you want in as the greatest of all time. It's one of the reasons that it's annoying, and it's one of the reasons that as a topic it sticks around. Because there's no way to disprove it, right? It's very annoying for me because there is no title called greatest of all time. There's no competition you can enter and come out greatest of all time. It's just something that you say. But Henry brings up a very fair point on Khabib. Listen, the reason that we did not get to 30-0, the reason that this stopped at 29-0, had nothing to do with competition. Khabib was not scared of anybody, and nobody maintains that he was. But the reason they didn't get to 30-0, and they looked at that contract, and boy, they kept changing the contract, they kept changing the figure, and they kept moving a decimal and kept adding a comma to it. They were looking at the wrong numbers. If you wanted to get Khabib to 30-0, or you wanted him to walk out there for the 30th time, whether he got the victory or not, it was the weight class. That was the number, and that was the problem in the contract. The number one reason that fighters retire, the absolute number one reason, is they don't want to make weight anymore. Now, no fighter in history, in any sport, wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu, MMA, has ever said, I'm retiring because I don't want to make weight anymore. It's the number one reason they do retire, but they've never said it. It just doesn't sound right. But the reason you didn't get Khabib versus Conor 2 had nothing to do with money or location. Had nothing to do with a statement that was made or a promise that was going to be kept. Khabib as an athlete was done weighing 155 pounds. They could have got Khabib Conor 2. All they had to do was make it at 170 pounds. And I'm sharing that with you because that is a great mystery that is not even known to this day. Like if you were to sit the players down in the room and try to figure out how we didn't get Khabib versus Conor point 2, it would tie into the late, great, rest his soul, Coach Nurmagomedov. It would tie into a promise. It would tie into a statement was made. It would tie into a man of his word. No, you're completely wrong. When you were negotiating for that fight, if you would have said it's at 165 pounds or it's at 170 pounds, you would have got the fight. And if we're going to sit around and we're going to tell the story and we're going to tell history accurately for the way that it happened, that was the problem with that negotiation. Khabib would have done it. He just wasn't going to do it at 155 pounds. And why do I bring that up? Because if you're going to be a GOAT and you're going to be on the GOAT list, it wouldn't overly matter what the weight class was. When this sport started, there was no weight classes. And I want to give Henry credit. I think Henry Cejudo is the great combat athlete of all time. I give him credit for what he did at the Olympic Games, which was at 121 pounds, and the youthful age that he did it of 20 years old. I give him credit for being the UFC world champion at 125. I give him credit for being the UFC champion at 135. It's just if we're going to tell the story, they're all the same. Those aren't different weight classes. That's all the same. 121 and 125, it's the same thing. 121, 125, 135, it's all the same. You weigh the same thing. It's a little weird that we have divisions separated by 125 and 135. Put them all together. They weigh the same. In all fairness, 145 to 155, it's the same thing. You weigh the same thing. The only weight class that matters is 205 up to heavyweight, where in most jurisdictions, heavyweight is capped at 265 pounds. And in all jurisdictions, light heavyweight is at 205 pounds. If you're covering that spread, now you're talking about something that actually matters. Aside from that, y'all weigh the same thing. And just letting you in on the gag. You're not going to get a whole bunch of credit. Not when the guy that made this sport famous, Royce Gracie, weighed 178 pounds and took on all comers. And some of those guys were the better part of 300. And he was taking on those guys 2 and 3 times in one evening. With or without gloves, with or without a weigh-in. And I just share for you, to be the greatest of all time, do you have to have covered the spread at multiple weight classes? And people have different opinions. And they like to come in almost philosophically and make their arguments who the greatest of all time is. But it's not as wide open for discussion as you think. The term pound for pound, which is very similar to what we mean by greatest of all time, but the term pound for pound ties back to a boxing reporter from Brooklyn in a small-time newspaper in 1980 when he was trying to, and he defined what it meant as the person that coined the phrase pound for pound. He then gave a definition as to what that means, and it's called poetic license. If he is the one that created the phrase, he gets to decide what the definition is. And he said, if they all weighed the same, if weight wasn't an issue, if it was just skill, they both weigh the same thing, who could beat who? And he tied it to boxing specifically. And as we do look at our sport, and we do look at the greatest of all time, you've got to understand willingness. Your willingness to compete, regardless of the conditions, regardless of who the opponent is, regardless of the date. If you're comparing them to the original, to Royce Gracie, the original champion, the original best that we had, the original martial artist, you have to have the components that Royce had, which was a willingness. There wasn't contracts and you sit down, you go through a training camp and you study one guy. There was 40 minutes between fights. You had no idea who your next fight was going to be until it played out. It was an architecture known as a straight line bracket, but you had no way to control that. And when you talk about the greats, if you are going to tie that back to our own history and lineage, you've got to tie that back to things that Royce did, whether you like that or not. And Khabib is a great. Would I put Henry in front of Khabib solely based on the idea that Henry was willing to compete at multiple weight classes and Khabib wasn't? No. No, it's not enough. I would have to look at records. I would have to look at resumes. I would have to look at championships. But following a sport and playing by the rules that are predetermined by somebody else, I don't think can reduce your status as the GOAT. You either won the matches you had when you had them, or you didn't. Fun debate. Henry versus Khabib, GOAT status. Fun debate. 2 wonderful careers. 2 championships, 2 different divisions versus undefeated. It's very hard for anything to get in the way of undefeated.